It all began the night the sky forgot how to be empty, and something ancient drew close enough to be seen with human eyes. Daniel Foster had spent 43 years working the same land his grandfather had broken with a mule and plow back in 1947. The farm sat in the Nebraska sandhills where the earth rolled like frozen waves, and the horizon stretched so far it seemed to curve into eternity. It was honest work, hard work, the kind that left calluses on your hands and left you too tired to think about the things that haunted you when the sun went down. Daniel's wife, Rebecca, had died 2 springs ago. Cancer, the kind that moved fast and showed no mercy. They'd had 31 good years together, raised 3 children who'd all moved to cities with names like Opportunity and Future. Now Daniel worked the farm alone, speaking more to his horses than to people, finding comfort in routines that required no explanation and demanded no vulnerability. He still went to church most Sundays at the little white chapel in town, still bowed his head during prayers and sang hymns from memory. But the faith that had once felt solid now felt like something he was performing, going through motions because stopping would mean admitting he wasn't sure what he believed anymore. If God was good, why had Rebecca suffered? If God was listening, why had every prayer for healing gone unanswered? These questions circled his mind like vultures, and he'd learned to ignore them, because the alternative was despair. It was late October when the news started talking about something called 3I Atlas, an interstellar object, the scientists said, not from our solar system but from somewhere else, traveling through the cosmos at impossible speeds. It had been discovered months earlier, but now it was approaching the inner solar system, passing close to the sun in a trajectory that defied normal physics. Daniel had heard about it on the radio while driving his truck into town for supplies. The announcer's voice carried a note of excitement barely contained by professional composure. Some scientists were calling it the most significant astronomical event in human history. Others were more cautious, saying it was just another piece of cosmic debris, nothing to get worked up about. But there were other voices too. Conspiracy theorists claiming it wasn't natural, religious figures suggesting it was prophetic. Someone had calculated that 3I Atlas would reach its closest point to the sun on a date that aligned with ancient biblical prophecies about signs in the heavens. Daniel had dismissed it all as noise, the kind of sensational nonsense that filled airwaves when people had too much information and not enough wisdom. He had real work to do, fences to mend, hay to bring in before the first snow, a life to maintain, even though most days it felt like he was just waiting for permission to stop. The night everything changed was unremarkable in its beginning. Daniel had finished evening chores and sat on his porch with a cup of coffee gone cold, watching the sun paint the western sky in shades of amber and rust. This was his ritual, this sitting and watching, this marking the passage of another day survived. The stars began to appear, first one, then dozens, then thousands, until the Milky Way stretched overhead like a river of light. But tonight, something was different. Daniel noticed it gradually, a brightness in the sky that shouldn't be there. Not a star. It was too large, too diffuse. Not a planet. It moved wrong, or rather it felt wrong in a way he couldn't articulate. It was as if the sky itself had opened and something behind reality was looking through. He stood, coffee cup forgotten, and walked into the yard for a better view. The brightness intensified, pulsing with colors that had no names, gold and silver, and something that looked like crystallized starlight. It wasn't the object itself he was seeing. 3I Atlas was millions of miles away near the sun. This was something else, something closer, something that had come because the object had arrived. The air around Daniel grew still, not quiet. That would imply the absence of sound. This was stillness, as if reality itself had paused to take a breath. The horses in the barn stopped moving. The wind that had been rustling through the dry autumn grass went silent. Even Daniel's own heartbeat seemed to slow, each pulse stretching into eternity. Then the light descended. It came slowly, deliberately, like something that had crossed unimaginable distances and wanted to savor the final approach. As it drew closer, Daniel could see it wasn't a craft in any conventional sense. It was light made solid, geometry that hurt to look at directly, patterns that suggested intelligence without revealing its nature. Daniel should have been terrified. Every instinct should have been screaming at him to run, to hide, to deny what his eyes were showing him. But instead, he felt an overwhelming calm, a recognition, as if some part of him that existed beyond thought and fear knew this moment had always been coming. The light touched the ground 20 yards from where he stood, and from its center emerged a figure. The being was tall, perhaps 8 feet, with proportions that were almost human but refined in ways that suggested a different evolutionary path. Its form seemed to shimmer, as if it existed partially in dimensions Daniel's eyes couldn't fully perceive. The skin, if it was skin, appeared to be made of something between flesh and starlight, translucent and luminous. The face was serene, with large eyes that held depths Daniel couldn't fathom. Not empty, but full of something his mind struggled to name. Compassion, perhaps, or understanding, or the kind of ancient wisdom that came from witnessing the birth and death of galaxies. The being didn't move toward Daniel. It simply stood there, radiating presence, and Daniel felt a communication that bypassed language entirely. Not words in his mind, but knowing that appeared fully formed, complete with context and nuance that speech could never carry. Do not fear, Daniel Foster. I have traveled far to speak with you, to show you what is coming, to help you understand what 3i Atlas truly is. Daniel's voice came out as a whisper. What are you? I am a messenger, a guide, one who watches the unfolding of consciousness across galaxies. Your species calls my kind by many names: angels, aliens, ascended masters. The labels matter less than the function. I am here because the sign you have been waiting for has arrived. Sign? What sign? The object passing near your sun, the one your scientists call 3i Atlas. It is not what they believe, not a random piece of cosmic debris. It is a vessel, an ark, a gathering point for souls who must leave before the transformation begins. Daniel felt his legs grow weak. I don't understand. You will. Come, let me show you. The being extended what resembled a hand, though the fingers were longer than human proportions allowed, and they glowed with soft inner light. Daniel hesitated only a moment before reaching out. When their hands touched, the world exploded into something beyond vision. Daniel was no longer standing in his yard. He was floating in space itself, the earth a blue marble below him, the sun a blazing glory to his left. And there, between earth and sun, was 3i Atlas. But what he saw now bore no resemblance to the artist renderings on the news. This was no chunk of ice and rock. This was architecture, purpose, design. The object was vast beyond comprehension, its surface covered in patterns that seemed to shift and flow like liquid mathematics. And from it emanated waves of something Daniel could only describe as calling, a summons, a gathering signal that resonated across dimensions. This is the arc of transition, the being communicated. Every civilization reaches a point where consciousness must evolve or stagnate. Your species is at that threshold now. Some souls are ready for what comes next, others are not. 3i Atlas has come to gather those who are not yet ready, to give them more time, more experiences, more opportunities to grow. Where will it take them? To other worlds, other dimensions, places where they can continue their learning without being caught in the transformation. Not punishment, not abandonment, simply postponement, until they are prepared for what your species is becoming. Daniel watched as streams of light began flowing from Earth toward the object. Not visible to normal human sight, but here, in this elevated state of perception, he could see them clearly. Souls, millions of them, leaving their bodies during sleep, during meditation, during moments of unconscious release, being drawn to the vessel that would carry them forward. Is this the rapture? Daniel asked, the word feeling inadequate even as he spoke it. It is one interpretation of what that word attempted to describe. But understand, this is not about worthiness, not about being chosen or rejected by a judging God. This is about readiness, about consciousness reaching critical mass for transformation. Those departing are not condemned. They are simply not yet ready for what dissolution and rebirth requires. And those who stay? What happens to us? The being turned its luminous gaze fully upon Daniel, and in that look, he felt seen more completely than ever before in his life. You will transform. Your consciousness will expand beyond the limitations of individual identity. You will remember what you have always been. Infinite awareness, experiencing itself through temporary forms. The veil between physical and spiritual will thin, then dissolve. You will see the divine in all things because you will recognize that all things are divine, including yourself. That sounds like death. It is death of the ego, of separation, of the illusion that you are a separate self in a hostile universe. But it is also birth of expanded consciousness, of direct knowing, of return to source while maintaining individual perspective. This is what the teacher you call Jesus was demonstrating. Not unique divinity but universal possibility. He died to the limited self and was reborn to infinite consciousness. He showed the way. Daniel felt tears streaming down his face. though in this disembodied state he wasn't sure if they were real or metaphorical. But the churches say he died for our sins, that his blood paid our debt, that we're saved by believing in him. He taught transformation through love. Later interpreters, well-meaning but limited, translated transformation into transaction, changed demonstration into substitution. The teacher showed that consciousness survives death, that love transcends all boundaries, that what he could become, all could become. You will do greater works than these, he said. Do you remember? He meant it literally. Daniel remembered the verses he'd read 1,000 times but never quite understood. Remembered how Jesus had seemed frustrated when people wanted to worship him instead of following his example. Remembered how the message had always been about kingdom within, about seeing God in the least of these, about love being the fulfillment of all law. The transformation is not coming, Daniel. It is here, has been quietly unfolding for decades. Those with eyes to see have witnessed it. Consciousness awakening, souls remembering, the old structures of control and separation beginning to crumble. 3-Eye Atlas is the sign for those who need signs. But the truth has always been available to those willing to look. Then why show me? Why tell me this? Because you are a witness. Because your doubt has made you humble. Because your grief has opened you. Because you will not try to build an institution or claim special authority. You will simply live differently, and in that living others will see what is possible. The vision shifted. Daniel saw Rebecca, his wife, not as she'd been when dying, wasted and hollow and fighting for breath, but as she was now, radiant, luminous, free. She smiled at him with a love so pure it shattered every grief he'd carried. She is not gone, the being communicated, only transformed ahead of you. She waits, though waiting is not quite the right word, as she exists beyond time. She is with you even now, in ways you don't yet perceive. When your own transformation comes, you will understand. You will be reunited not as separate individuals but as aspects of the same infinite consciousness recognizing itself. Daniel tried to reach for her, but the vision faded. He was being pulled back, drawn down toward his body, toward the farm, and the life he'd lived in such loneliness. But before he fully returned, the being's final communication resonated through him like a bell. 3-Eye Atlas will complete its pass near the sun in 7 days. On that day, the final gathering will occur. Those not ready will depart. Those ready will begin the conscious transformation. You have 7 days, Daniel Foster, to prepare, to share what you know, to live from truth instead of fear. Use them well. Daniel gasped, stumbling backward, suddenly fully present in his body. The being was gone. The light was gone. He stood alone in his yard under normal stars. The night exactly as it had been before the encounter. But everything had changed. He had changed. The knowledge burned in him like a second sun, impossible to ignore, impossible to dismiss as dream or delusion. He looked up at the sky, searching for 3-Eye Atlas, but it was invisible to naked eyes at this distance. Yet he could feel it now, feel the gathering happening, feel souls across the planet being drawn to the vessel that would carry them forward to other experiences while Earth underwent its transformation. 7 days. He had 7 days. Daniel walked back to his house on unsteady legs, his mind racing. What was he supposed to do with this knowledge? Who would believe him? He was just a farmer, a widower, a man whose faith had been hanging by threads. Who would listen to him talk about alien messengers and cosmic vessels and the true meaning of Jesus' teachings? But as he sat at his kitchen table, hands shaking as he poured whiskey he rarely touched, Daniel realized something. The being had been right. He wouldn't try to convince anyone, wouldn't stand on street corners proclaiming the end times, wouldn't build a following or claim special authority. He would simply live differently, would love more openly, would see the divine in every person he met, would trust that transformation was unfolding exactly as it needed to, and his only job was to participate consciously instead of sleepwalking through it. The whiskey sat untouched as Daniel made a decision. Tomorrow, he would begin, would reach out to his children, would mend broken relationships, would tell people he'd taken for granted that they mattered, would live as if love was the only thing that was real, because according to what he'd been shown, it was. 7 days to prepare, 7 days to show others through his example that transformation was possible, that consciousness could expand, that the kingdom really was within, waiting to be discovered. Daniel looked at the wedding photo on the wall, him and Rebecca, young and full of hope, standing in front of the church where they'd made promises that had lasted until death parted them. Except death hadn't parted them at all. She'd simply transformed ahead of him. And when his own transformation came, they would recognize each other as they truly were, as they'd always been. The night outside his window was quiet now, the strange stillness replaced by normal sounds. Crickets, wind, the distant bark of a dog. But Daniel heard something beneath it all. A humming, a frequency that resonated in his chest. The sound of consciousness awakening, the sound of transformation beginning. 3i Atlas was near the sun, gathering those who needed more time. And here on Earth, those who remained were being given the opportunity to remember what they'd forgotten, to become what they'd always been capable of becoming, to demonstrate what the teacher had shown them 2,000 years ago. Daniel finally allowed himself to cry, not from grief this time, but from gratitude, for the encounter, for the truth, for the knowledge that death was illusion, and love was eternal, and consciousness was infinite, for understanding that Rebecca wasn't lost, his son wasn't abandoned, and he himself had never been alone. The transformation was here, the sign had been given. And Daniel Foster, ordinary farmer from the Nebraska sandhills, had been chosen to witness it and live it and show others that what seemed impossible was actually the most natural thing in the world. Waking up, remembering, coming home. 7 days. The countdown had begun. The first morning after the encounter, Daniel woke before dawn feeling both exhausted and intensely alive. His body ached as though he'd run miles, but his mind blazed with clarity he'd never experienced. The knowledge the being had shared pulsed through him like a current, and when he looked at his hands in the pre-dawn darkness, he half expected them to be glowing. They weren't, of course. He was still flesh and bone. Still Daniel Foster, farmer, widower, ordinary man. But something fundamental had shifted in how he inhabited that flesh and bone. He made coffee and stood on his porch, watching the sun rise over land his family had worked for 3 generations. The light spreading across the fields looked different now. Not just photons bouncing off grass and dirt, but something alive, conscious, the divine made visible. He could almost see the energy flowing through everything, the fence posts, the barn, the horses moving in their paddock, all of it connected, all of it one vast organism expressing itself through countless forms. Daniel thought about the 7 days, 6 now since the encounter had happened near midnight. 6 days until 3i Atlas completed its pass near the sun, and the final gathering occurred. 6 days to live what he'd been shown, to demonstrate transformation, to be a witness not through words, but through presence. He started with something simple, something that terrified him more than facing an alien being had. He called his daughter. Jennifer lived in Denver with her husband and 2 children Daniel had met exactly 3 times in 5 years. She was his middle child, the one who'd inherited Rebecca's sharp mind and sharper tongue. They'd fought before she left for college. He couldn't even remember what about now, and the distance between them had calcified into polite but hollow phone calls on holidays. Daniel had told himself it was just how families evolved. Children grew up, moved away, built their own lives. But he knew the truth. He'd built the distance deliberately because connection required vulnerability, and vulnerability meant risk. The phone rang 4 times before she answered, her voice carrying that cautious tone people used when unexpected calls came early in the morning. "Dad, is everything okay?" "I'm fine," Daniel said, then corrected himself. "Actually, I'm not fine. I mean, I'm healthy. But Jen, I need to tell you something. I've been a terrible father." Silence on the other end. Then, "What?" "Not in the obvious ways. I provided for you, kept you safe, but I wasn't present, not really. I was so scared of losing you kids the way I lost my own parents young that I kept you at arm's length. And after your mom died, I used grief as an excuse to push you even further away. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." He heard her breathing, heard what might have been a muffled sob. When she spoke again, her voice was thick. "Dad, where's this coming from? I had an experience last night. I can't explain it, but it made me realize that time is shorter than we think and love is all that matters. I don't want to waste any more time pretending we're fine when we're not. I want to know you, really know you, your life, your dreams, what keeps you up at night. I want to be your father, not just someone you call out of obligation." The conversation lasted 2 hours. Jennifer talked about her marriage struggling under financial stress, about her daughter being bullied at school, about feeling inadequate as a mother and wondering if she'd inherited Daniel's emotional distance. And Daniel listened, really listened, without trying to fix or minimize or redirect. Just witnessed her, saw her, loved her without condition or agenda. When they finally hung up, both were crying. Jennifer had agreed to visit the farm next weekend with the kids, not out of obligation, but because something had cracked open between them, something real. Daniel sat in his kitchen feeling hollowed out and filled up simultaneously. This was what the being had meant. This was the work. Not grand pronouncements or miraculous demonstrations, but these small acts of choosing connection over protection, love over fear, presence over avoidance. He called his other children, his son Mark, who worked finance in Chicago and whom Daniel barely understood, his youngest, Sarah, who'd moved to Oregon and whom Daniel had judged for choices that differed from his own values. With each call, Daniel practiced something foreign to his nature, admitting fault, expressing love, asking forgiveness, opening himself to rejection because that was the risk love required. Not all the conversations went smoothly. Mark was suspicious, wondering if Daniel had received a terminal diagnosis. Sarah was defensive, old wounds still fresh, but Daniel persisted gently, not pushing, just offering truth and letting them decide how to receive it. By mid-morning, he'd mended more relationships in a few hours than he had in the past decade. It left him trembling with emotional exposure, but also strangely peaceful. The being was right. This was transformation, not something that happened to you, but something you chose, moment by moment, interaction by interaction. Over the following days, Daniel continued the work. He drove into town and stopped by the diner where he usually ate in silence, invisible to everyone but the waitress taking his order. This time, he struck up conversations, asked people about their lives, listened to their stories, saw beyond the surface-level pleasantries to the loneliness and longing and quiet desperation most people carried. He met a young couple struggling with their failing farm, drowning in debt and shame. Daniel spent an afternoon helping them repair equipment, but more than that, he shared his own failures and fears, told them about the years after Rebecca died when he'd considered selling everything because he couldn't bear the memories, showed them that struggle didn't mean weakness, that asking for help was courage, not failure. He visited elderly neighbors he'd ignored for years beyond polite waves, sat with Mrs. Henderson, who'd lost her husband the same year Rebecca died, listened as she talked about loneliness and the cruelty of outliving everyone you loved. Daniel told her about his encounter, not the details of alien beings and cosmic vessels, but the essence. That consciousness was eternal, that death was transition, not termination, that those we'd loved were not lost but transformed. Mrs. Henderson cried and held his hand and said she'd been waiting her whole life for someone to tell her that truth, that the church had given her rituals and doctrine but never the comfort of knowing death was not the end of relationship. Daniel left her house feeling that this conversation alone had justified his encounter with the being. But the most profound change happened within Daniel himself. He began seeing the world through new eyes. The veil between physical and spiritual thinned just as the being had promised. He started perceiving things that had always been there but filtered out by ordinary consciousness. When he worked with his horses, he felt their awareness touching his. Not language, but connection, recognition, a knowing that they were both expressions of the same consciousness, wearing different forms but fundamentally united. When he walked his fields at dusk, he saw the energy flowing through the land, the way plants communicated through root systems, the way birds navigated invisible currents, the way everything was woven together in networks of relationship and exchange. Nothing was separate, nothing was isolated, all was one vast organism experiencing itself through infinite variations. And when he thought about Three-Eye Atlas approaching its closest point to the sun, he understood it differently now. This wasn't invasion or judgment or punishment. This was mercy, compassion. Those who weren't ready for the dissolution of ego required by transformation were being given more time, more experiences, more opportunities to grow. They weren't being left behind. They were being lovingly relocated to contexts that matched their current level of consciousness. On the fourth day, something unexpected happened. Daniel was in his barn repairing a stall door when a young man appeared in the doorway. He was maybe 25, thin to the point of gauntness with haunted eyes and the jittery energy of someone running from something. "You Daniel Foster?" the young man asked. "I am. I heard you've been talking to people, saying strange things about transformation and consciousness and the world changing." He laughed bitterly. "People think you've lost it, but I wanted to hear for myself." Daniel set down his tools and studied the young man, saw beyond the bravado to the desperation underneath. "What's your name?" "Kyle." "Why are you really here, Kyle?" The young man's facade crumbled. "Because I'm thinking about killing myself. Have been for months. And I figured before I did it, I should check out the crazy farmer everyone's talking about, see if he actually knows something or if he's just another bullshit artist." Daniel felt the being's presence then, not visibly, but as a warmth in his chest, a knowing. This moment mattered more than he could understand. Come sit, Daniel said, gesturing to hay bales. Let me tell you what I've learned. For the next 3 hours, Daniel talked. Not about alien encounters or cosmic vessels. He knew Kyle wasn't ready for that. But about the essence of what he'd been shown. That consciousness was eternal. That the self we thought we were was just a costume consciousness wore temporarily. That what felt like unbearable suffering was actually the catalyst for transformation. That nothing was permanent, except the awareness, experiencing it all. Kyle listened with an intensity that suggested he was hearing something he desperately needed, but never found in therapy or medication or the hollow reassurances people offered when they didn't know what else to say. But how do you know? Kyle asked finally. How can you be sure it's not just comforting lies we tell ourselves because the truth is too terrible? Daniel considered. How did you convey certainty born from direct experience? How did you translate knowing into knowledge someone else could hold? I don't have proof I can give you, Daniel admitted. But I can tell you this. I spent 2 years after my wife died believing I was alone, that the universe was cold and indifferent, that love ended at death and nothing I did mattered. And Kyle, it was hell. Not the fire and brimstone kind, but the worst kind, the emptiness kind, the meaninglessness kind. So what changed? I stopped believing my thoughts about reality and started experiencing reality directly. I opened myself to possibility instead of insisting I already knew all the answers. And when I did that, truth found me. Not the truth I expected or wanted, but truth, nonetheless. Kyle was quiet for a long time. Then, if I stay alive, if I give this a chance, what am I supposed to do? Live. Stay curious. Pay attention to moments of beauty and connection and love. Notice that consciousness exists and ask yourself what that means. Be willing to not know instead of clinging to certainty. And Kyle, help someone else. Anyone. Service to others is the fastest path to realizing we're not separate. The young man left as the sun was setting. Not transformed, but different. Carrying a small flame of hope where before there'd been only darkness. Daniel didn't know if Kyle would choose life. But he'd offered what he could, presence, truth, and the possibility that suffering had meaning. That night, lying in bed, Daniel felt exhausted in ways that had nothing to do with physical labor. Emotional exposure was harder than any farm work he'd ever done, but it was also more real, more meaningful, more aligned with what the being had shown him. 3 days remained. On the 5th day, something extraordinary happened. Daniel was working in his field when he saw it, a shimmer in the air like heat waves, but the day was cool. And within that shimmer, he saw others, beings like the one who'd visited him. Not just one, but dozens, perhaps hundreds, moving through the world invisible to normal sight. They were everywhere, standing beside people in distress, sitting with the dying in hospitals, walking alongside children, present but unseen, guiding, protecting, loving without interfering. The shepherds of consciousness the being had mentioned. They'd always been there, Daniel realized. Humanity had simply stopped seeing them, stopped believing in anything beyond the physical. But now, as transformation approached, the veil was thinning. Those with awakening consciousness could perceive what had always been present, and Daniel understood that he wasn't alone in this awareness. Others were waking up. All over the world, people were having their own encounters, their own revelations, their own moments of remembering what they'd forgotten. The transformation wasn't waiting for 3-Eye Atlas to complete its pass. It was already unfolding. The cosmic vessel was just a focal point, a sign for those who needed signs. But the real change was happening in billions of small moments. In Cheryl's daughter healing, in Kyle choosing life, in Jennifer opening to her father, in countless souls across the planet choosing love over fear, connection over isolation, presence over avoidance. On the 6th day, Daniel received unexpected visitors. His 3 children arrived together, having coordinated without telling him. They came with grandchildren he barely knew and questions they'd driven hours to ask. "Dad," Mark said as they gathered in Daniel's living room, "what's happening to you? You sound different. You look different. Everyone in town is talking about how you've changed." Daniel looked at his children, these adults he'd helped create but never fully known, and felt overwhelming love. Not the conditional love he'd offered before, the kind that said, "I love you if you make choices I approve of," but unconditional love, the kind that saw their divine nature beneath all the human struggle and confusion. "I saw something," he said simply, "or maybe I was shown something, and it changed how I see everything." "What did you see?" Sarah asked. Daniel told them. Not everything. He knew they weren't ready for beings of light and cosmic vessels, but he told them about realizing consciousness was eternal, about understanding death was transition, about seeing that love transcended all boundaries and that we were all connected at levels deeper than physical form. He told them about their mother, how she wasn't gone, just transformed, how she existed in dimensions they couldn't perceive but would one day inhabit themselves, how love literally could not die because it was the fundamental substance of reality itself. His children listened with expressions ranging from concern to wonder. And when he finished, Jennifer spoke first. That sounds like what mystics talk about, or near-death experiencers, or people who've had profound spiritual awakenings. Maybe, Daniel said, or maybe those are all descriptions of the same truth. That reality is more than what we normally perceive. That consciousness is not a product of the brain, but what the brain receives. That we are not bodies that have souls, but souls that temporarily have bodies. Do you believe that? Mark asked. Or do you know it? I know it, Daniel said with quiet certainty. The same way you know you're conscious. Not because someone told you, but because you experience it directly. They spent the day together, really together in ways they never had before. The grandchildren played in the barn while the adults talked about deep things, life and death and meaning and purpose. Daniel shared what he'd learned not as doctrine, but as experience, and he watched his children begin to open to possibilities they'd dismissed or never considered. As evening approached and they prepared to leave, Jennifer hugged Daniel tightly. I don't know what happened to you, Dad, but I want what you have. That peace, that certainty. Will you teach me? I'll share what I know, Daniel said, but you have to experience it yourself. No one can give you awakening. They can only point toward it and create space for you to discover it yourself. After they left, Daniel sat on his porch as darkness fell. Tomorrow was the 7th day. Tomorrow, 3 Atlas would complete its pass near the sun. Tomorrow, according to what the being had shown him, the final gathering would occur and the transformation would accelerate. Daniel felt no fear, only anticipation, only readiness. He'd done what the being asked, lived these 6 days from truth instead of fear, connected instead of isolated, loved without condition, been present to each moment instead of sleepwalking through existence. He didn't know exactly what would happen when 3I Atlas completed its pass. Would there be visible signs? Would people simply disappear? Would the change be dramatic or subtle? The being hadn't given him those details, but Daniel trusted that whatever unfolded would be exactly what needed to happen. He looked up at the stars, searching for 3I Atlas, though it remained invisible to his eyes. But he felt it, felt the gathering happening, felt souls across the planet being gently drawn to the vessel that would carry them onward. Not everyone, but those who needed more time, those whose consciousness wasn't yet ready for the dissolution and rebirth required by full awakening. Thank you, Daniel whispered to the night, to the being, to whatever force orchestrated consciousness evolution across galaxies. Thank you for choosing me, for showing me, for giving me these days to live differently. And as if in response, he felt that familiar warmth in his chest, the presence of something vast and loving and eternally patient. The being was still watching, still guiding, still shepherding souls through the transformation that had been prophesied in every religion, every mystical tradition, every vision of humanity's ultimate destiny. Daniel went to bed that night feeling complete. Whatever tomorrow brought, he was ready. He'd lived these final days as fully as he knew how, had loved without holding back, had spoken truth without fear of judgment, had demonstrated that transformation was possible, and if 3I Atlas was the sign, then let those who needed signs receive them. But the real truth was simpler and more profound than any celestial event could convey. The kingdom was within. It always had been, and consciousness was awakening to remember what it had temporarily forgotten. The 7th day dawned clear and cold, the kind of October morning that made the sky look infinite. Daniel rose early and went through his morning routine, but everything felt charged with significance. This was the day 3I Atlas would reach its closest approach to the sun, the day the being had marked as the moment of final gathering, the day when those who weren't ready would depart and those who remained would consciously begin the transformation. He expected something dramatic, lights in the sky, mass disappearances, some undeniable sign that would prove to skeptics that reality was not what they'd believed. But as the morning progressed, everything seemed normal. Birds sang, the sun rose, his horses needed feeding, the world continued its ordinary revolutions. Daniel felt a moment of doubt. Had he imagined it all? Had the encounter been delusion, the knowledge false, the prophecy empty? But then, around noon, he felt it, a shift, not in external reality, but in consciousness itself, like a frequency changing. a vibration rising. The air didn't look different, but it felt different, pregnant with possibility, humming with potential. Daniel walked outside and stood in his field, sensing rather than seeing what was happening. Around the world, in hospital rooms and bedrooms and cars and churches and offices, souls were making their choice, most unconsciously, simply responding to an inner pull, a call that operated below conscious awareness. And those who answered the call were being gathered, not violently, not dramatically, but gently, lovingly, their consciousness separating from physical form and being drawn to 3-eye Atlas for transport to whatever came next in their journey. Daniel understood that most people wouldn't notice. Those left behind would experience it as sudden deaths or disappearances or mysterious illnesses. They would invent explanations that fit their worldview. But those awakening, those whose consciousness was expanding, would understand what was actually happening: a migration, a redistribution, a cosmic adjustment that honored free will while ensuring that consciousness always moved toward growth. And those who remained? Daniel felt his own awareness expanding, the veil thinning even further. He could see now, really see, the energy flowing through everything, could perceive the consciousness in the land, the trees, the animals, could sense the presence of the beings who walked among humanity, unseen shepherds guiding the awakening. He understood that this was just the beginning. That transformation wasn't an event, but a process. That those who remained would spend the coming years, perhaps decades, gradually awakening to their true nature, learning to access abilities that seemed supernatural, but were actually natural extensions of consciousness fully realized. Healing, manifestation, communication beyond words, all of it waiting to be rediscovered. As the day progressed, Daniel received calls. Mark saying he'd felt something strange, a pull towards something he couldn't name, but he'd consciously chosen to stay, to see what came next, to participate in the transformation rather than postponing it. Sarah describing a vision she'd had that morning of beings of light standing beside everyone she saw, asking if Daniel knew what it meant. Jennifer crying as she told him that something in her had shifted, that she suddenly understood what he'd been trying to communicate, that consciousness was eternal and love was real, and death was illusion. His children were awakening. The knowledge he'd carried was spreading not through words, but through resonance, through the invisible connections that linked all consciousness. And Daniel understood that this was how transformation always worked, not through mass media or institutions, but through intimate connections, soul to soul, heart to heart, one awakening catalyzing others. As evening approached, Daniel returned to the spot where the being had first appeared, and as if summoned by his presence, the light descended once more. The being emerged, its luminous form more visible now than before, as if Daniel's consciousness had expanded enough to perceive it more fully. "You have done well," the being communicated. "You have lived the truth, demonstrated the transformation, and others have awakened because you first awakened." "Is it over?" Daniel asked. "The gathering?" "The intensive phase is complete. Those who needed to depart have been relocated to contexts that serve their growth. Those who remain have chosen, consciously or not, to participate in humanity's transformation. What comes next will unfold over your remaining years, gradually, then suddenly, as consciousness reaches critical thresholds. And me? What's my role now? The same as before. Live the truth, love without condition, see the divine in all things, be present for those awakening to guide them as I guided you. You are a shepherd now, Daniel Foster, one who has remembered and can help others remember." Daniel felt tears streaming down his face, not from sadness, but from the weight and beauty of that responsibility, to be a guide for others, to help souls navigate the confusion and wonder of awakening, to serve consciousness evolution not through preaching but through being. There is something else, the being communicated, a gift for your service. The being moved closer and touched Daniel's chest. Where its luminous hand made contact, Daniel felt everything. He felt Rebecca's presence, not distant but immediately near, felt his consciousness expand to touch not just his immediate surroundings, but the whole web of awakening consciousness across the planet, felt the love that formed the foundation of reality, the love that had always been there but he'd been unable to fully perceive. And in that moment, Daniel understood what Jesus had meant by resurrection, not returning to physical life, but consciousness transforming beyond physical limitation while maintaining individual perspective. He understood what ascension meant, not floating into clouds, but awareness expanding to encompass dimensions previously hidden. He understood that heaven was not a location but a state of consciousness, and he was touching that state now. This is what awaits all who complete the transformation, the being explained. This expanded awareness, this dissolution of separation, this return to source while maintaining unique identity. You have glimpsed it, others will too, and eventually, all of humanity will inhabit this consciousness permanently. The being withdrew its hand and Daniel gasped, suddenly back in normal awareness but forever changed by what he'd experienced. He understood now that the transformation wasn't about escaping physical reality, but about perceiving physical reality correctly, seeing it as consciousness made manifest, recognizing the divine in the mundane. 3i Atlas will continue its journey, the being communicated, carrying those who were gathered to new experiences. But it will return, in your lifetime or beyond, each passage bringing another opportunity for souls to choose, another wave of transformation, until all of consciousness awakens to what it truly is. Will I see you again? You will see me always. I am never absent, only invisible to ordinary perception. As you continue to awaken, you will perceive my presence and the presence of others like me. We are here, always have been, always will be, shepherding consciousness through its eternal evolution. The being began to dissolve into light, but before it fully disappeared, one final communication resonated through Daniel. Tell them, Daniel Foster, not through preaching, but through living. Tell them that death is not the end, that love transcends all boundaries, that they are more than they believe themselves to be. Tell them by becoming the truth they seek, by living as consciousness that knows itself, by loving without condition, by seeing God in all things because all things are God experiencing itself. Then the being was gone, and Daniel stood alone under stars that had witnessed this exchange countless times across human history. Different people, different eras, same truth, same invitation, same transformation. Daniel returned to his house and sat at his kitchen table, his mind reeling, but his heart settled. 7 days had passed since the encounter began, 7 days that had changed everything, and now the real work began, not dramatic or visible, but profound, living each day from awakened consciousness, helping others awaken, being a bridge between what humanity had been and what it was becoming. He thought about writing down what had happened, creating a record, but he knew most would dismiss it as fantasy or delusion. The truth he carried couldn't be transmitted through words alone. It had to be lived, demonstrated, embodied. So Daniel Foster, farmer from the Nebraska sandhills, made a silent commitment. He would live the rest of his life as a demonstration of what the being had shown him, would love without condition, would serve without expectation, would see the divine in everyone he met, would be present for those awakening, would shepherd other souls the way the being had shepherded him. 3i Atlas had completed its pass near the sun. The gathering had occurred, the transformation had accelerated, and Daniel Foster had been given the profound privilege of witnessing it, of participating in it, of serving it. The cosmic vessel would continue its journey through space, carrying souls to their next experiences. But here on Earth, those who remained would undergo their own journey, from separation to unity, from fear to love, from unconsciousness to awakening, from believing they were human beings having spiritual experiences, to knowing they were spiritual beings having human experiences. And perhaps that was what Jesus had really been teaching all along. Not that he was the unique Son of God, but that all were sons and daughters of the divine. Not that his blood paid for sin, but that consciousness could transform beyond limitation. Not that he would return as conquering king, but that his consciousness, Christ consciousness, awakened consciousness, would gradually permeate all of humanity until everyone remembered what he had demonstrated. Perhaps heaven had never been somewhere else. Perhaps it had always been here, hidden beneath layers of forgetting, waiting for consciousness to expand enough to perceive it. Perhaps the second coming wasn't a person returning, but consciousness itself awakening in billions of individual hearts. Perhaps the kingdom was within, had always been within, waiting only for the courage to look. Daniel stood and walked to his window, looking out at land he'd worked for 43 years. The same fields, the same sky, the same stars, but nothing was the same. Everything had been transfigured by awakening consciousness, everything revealed as divine, and Daniel Foster, shepherd of souls, witness to transformation, ordinary man who'd encountered the extraordinary, smiled. The work continued, the awakening spread, and somewhere in the infinite cosmos, 3i Atlas carried its cargo of souls toward new experiences while Earth underwent its metamorphosis, from separation to unity, from fear to love, from sleep to waking, one soul at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of love at a time, until all consciousness remembered what it had temporarily forgotten, that it was divine, that it was eternal, that it was, and always had been, home. Truth or fiction? Perhaps not even the storyteller knows. Here, stories exist to touch and make you reflect. The magical reveals itself only to those who allow themselves to feel, not to those who insist on seeking certainties.